Hi, welcome back to Massenet. This week we're going to be talking about the film Without a Reasonable Doubt that came out in the year 1956. It was directed by Fritz, and it is about this man named Tom Garrett, played by Dana Andrews, and his father-in-law, who are trying to expose the flaws of the death penalty by getting Garrett convicted for a crime that he did not commit. And then they kind of fabricate all of these events, making it look like Garrett killed a burlesque dancer named Patty Gray. And then at the end of the film, it is revealed that Garrett actually did kill Patty, and his fiancée Susan, played by Joan Fontaine, actually reveals this when Garrett is having a conversation with her. So we're going to be showing some true crime magazine covers that we feel have some kind of relation to the crime and the events that happened in this film. So I'll kick us off. I found this one, and it was from the year 1949, and I thought that it was really relevant to the movie because obviously in the film, the death penalty was like a big thing. So I found this one. And so basically there's a guy, and he's in the chair and he's been convicted, but he's like gung-ho that he did not do the crime. And then the police officers and the detectives are like, obviously they have the evidence before them. So if anyone wants to jump in, I thought this was a kind of interesting cover for the film that we watched this week.
I think sort of like like what we have here is sort of like what I'm thinking of is like the contrast between the testimony and then the evidence, because I feel like you've got sort of like one thing that I know was pretty big in sort of like moving from 40s to like the 50s and 60s, sort of like in that time there was a lot of sort of like emerging technology and like emerging just sort of like forensic practices that just like that wouldn't have been there sort of like in the decades prior. So like I remember in the film there were things like like fingerprint detections and sort of like they were catching people based on sort of like on residue of makeup that the burlesque dancers wore left in left in the car, which was put there on purpose, planted evidence. And so like in the end, what it comes down to, since in the film all of the like the proof that the evidence that they put there for the murder conviction was planted and was false, since that's burned up, you sort of have this contrast of like hard forensic evidence and then the testimony, sort of like this kind of like subjective, unreliable, quote unquote, testimony of the man who's convicted. And it's sort of like there's this contrast of like which one do you believe? Do you believe the man in front of you, or do you believe like this evidence that you've gotten based on this new technology that like that can be construed as like objective?
Yeah, I think something that was like when we were watching it, and it was the interrogation scene, and they're presenting all this evidence, and like obviously Garrett worked with his father-in-law to create like the perfect crime, how like he did do it but he didn't do it but he did do it type thing. And as you're watching it and they're like having like all of this evidence against him, it kind of like plants that doubt in your head, but you've already been established as kind of an inside man in this crime, that you're like, no, he couldn't have done it, like he has to be innocent. And like everything they presented with him, he was like, it's just a coincidence. There's no coincidences in film noir. But I think that when I saw this one, how he's like so like stone faced, like even though he obviously did it, because this man in the magazine cover is like they already have him, but he's so like resolute in the fact that like he wasn't involved in the crime in the way that Garrett was, even though like subconsciously he was making everyone believe he did it in order to make them believe he didn't do it in kind of a way. So I thought that this cover was like a really nice parallel to like the commentary that they're making, not only on like Garrett's behavior when he was being interrogated, but also like the death penalty and what the movie was like trying to say about that, which I thought was kind of progressive, how like they were like, oh, we're anti-death penalty. I was like,
I know, when I saw that I was like, what?
yeah.
Yeah.
So also with this like whole with like not only this cover but also like other true crime, like true detective magazine covers, I realized like they're presenting this kind of like gory, like these stories and this kind of like morally depraved stories to the public through media. And that was like a really big thing throughout the film that I like kind of like picked up on. Like every time something big was being presented, it was through like a TV screen. Like we watched the interrogation through a TV screen, like through the other characters watching it, or like through the newspapers. Like media was like such a big part of this film in the way that like information traveled and was like presented to the public. So I thought that like this whole finding magazine covers was just like a really nice nod to that, because I wrote that down. It was like we're like watching this fabricated representation of things, just as like Garrett is like fabricating this whole story. So yeah, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but
it's sort of like the paradox of true crime and the paradox of noir, that this like, you know, these crimes are supposed to be things that no one knows about, but they're being projected on a film screen to like a literal audience. And it's the same thing sort of with like any like true crime story that gets reported on in, you know, like magazines or in a newspaper, where sort of like the like, you know, the narrative that, because like I've read, actually the one that I found was sort of like it was like an in-text thing of like, you know, the way that you're born, these things is almost like a storytelling type of thing, where, you know, they're saying, you know, like, oh, they did like, the criminal did this thing to cover up their crimes, and they did this thing to hide what they, you know, like what, to hide the evidence. And they're sort of presenting it as this sort of conspiracy that no one knows about, but everyone does know about it. You like, you're one of like probably thousands reading this magazine. This is public information that's being reported on. So it's not secret because it is being played for an audience, like films noir are being played for the audience in the theaters.
yeah, exactly. And also maybe I was like looking too much into this one, but I found it like kind of like parallel to the film, how the man in the polygraph chair, he's like in front of the detectives, and he's like obviously like he thinks he's gonna get away with it, but like behind him the detectives like already know that they got him, despite like all his efforts to lie and like fabricate this like false narrative in the way that like Garrett was trying to, and like trying to convince everyone that he killed Emma, only to like make them believe that he didn't kill her. So like the way that like the man in the chair is like in the foreground, and he like thinks that he has the power, when in reality like behind the scenes like the policemen are like doing their jobs and doing it really well, and they like already have him, like they like know that like he's gonna get convicted based on like all the evidence that they have. So that was just like another little thing about like the composition of like this cover that I thought was like a nod to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt.
Yeah, that's something I noticed too, and I've actually written about kind of composition of characters in noir before, in the way that like the police and like the detectives are always like above the criminal. Like I know here there's a lie detector test, so he has to be sitting down.
Yeah.
But it is the fact that he's like in the front, kind of, I mean, it's kind of hiding the fact that like, yes, he isn't getting away with it, but it's also like hiding his expression. Like I know he's serious, but he also has like a slight smirk, I feel like, you know. And like the detectives can't see that behind him, so kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, kind of like a little unsuspicion there, and how like he's
Totally.
like he like believes he's like manipulating people when he's like sitting right there and they have like all the evidence right in front of them. Yeah, so unless anyone has anything additional to add about this cover, we can maybe move on to the next one. All right, awesome.
Cool. Well, the one I'm going to talk about is from 1953. Let me get it. Okay. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm gonna make it bigger. All right, so when I was looking at different magazines, this one first caught my eye because of kind of the obvious, I guess, but to me they look like Tom and Susan, but that's just kind of the surface part. There is no, like, the only writing that's in this is "till murder do us part," and when I initially was reading into it, I was seeing it as Tom and Susan specifically for this film, but it's also kind of a nod to noir, where I feel like that separation is kind of always there between the man and the woman in some form. But here, I guess, the "till murder do us part," I was thinking of it kind of represents the end of the film where Susan finds out that Tom actually did it, and then that's the murder doing them apart. So yeah.
I think it's like Susan, yeah, because Susan was willing to like stick with him throughout the entire process, everything, up until like she figured out that he actually did kill her because he slipped up and called her Emma, dummy.
Exactly.
All he had to do was get the name correct. He really couldn't even do that. And but yeah, she was willing to forgive all this stuff, like him lying to her, him conniving with her father to do all this stuff, him putting her through stress and embarrassment, because that's got to be socially embarrassing, especially at that time when you're rich.
It also feels really insulting that like he and her father just like didn't tell her about it. It's just like, oh yeah, no, we won't tell your fiance, a very important person in your life. We're just gonna do this, and we'll see how she reacts. We'll see how she plays along.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry,
Thanks.
if I'm a man and he went behind my back with my father to do something, I'd be pissed at my father, and B, I might have to end that relationship. It seems kind of too close for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I think obviously the last straw for her is finding out he actually did murder a girl. And he's like, I did it for us to be together. Like, now and she's like, no, you killed her.
Could have done that without the murder.
Yeah. We could have just filed divorce papers for you.
Mm-hmm.
We could have just done that. But no, we had to murder somebody.
Yeah, I thought another thing that was interesting about the cover, was actually, yeah, the fact that he was doing it behind her back, and then obviously like he's in the dark, and then behind her he's like doing all these things, and she's still like has this expression on her face, but she's not looking like directly at him. And then at the end, she's the one that exposes him, right? Yeah. And so she has like the key in her hand, and like, I don't know.
That's smart. I see where you're going with that.
Yeah. How like Susan was his biggest supporter, like through the whole thing. She was like, no, he didn't do it. But then like once he says Emma, like she ends up being his downfall, even though she was like the person in his corner when he's literally on death row. Like something like murder is like the one thing, like that is the resolution. Like some people are like, oh, you like, you have weird quirks, but she's like, no, murder is like right on the line. That's where I break up with you.
Like, and it's right again too. He was like, oh, I saw it in the paper or something, and she's like, no.
It was sort of like this, like the final stab of like being pulled back and forth, because at first, she's not in the know with the plan that he's in with her father. So she's sort of like, oh, so he did do it. Like the man that I'm going to marry is a murderer. But then it was exposed, like, oh, it was just, like it was all just a prank, bro. It was all a social experiment. And then like she has to deal with that whiplash. And and now she's back on his side and she's trying to get him free, and she's doing anything that she can because she truly believes that he's innocent. But then it snaps back again when he messes up with the names. And so, like now she's like, you pull me back and forth like 3 times, like I'm done, like an electric chair.
Yeah.
I think the way that Susan was like yo-yoed back and forth is like really how the audience was too, because like that plot twist at the end, I don't know about you guys, but I was not expecting that literally at all. The fact that he like actually murdered her, I really thought that like this movie was doing something like really cool, where it was like the convoluted events weren't to hide like a crime, but were to create one, so that like to reveal this like unjust practice. But no, it was like to create a crime to hide a crime. So like the way that like we were kind of like catapulted back and forth being like an inside man to like really not knowing anything that was going on at all is the way like Susan was like, I love this man, but he's a murderer, but he's not. Oh wait, but he is because he knows her name.
It kind of how true crime reporting does happen, and sort of like my experience is mostly with modern stuff. I don't regularly read these magazines on my free time, but I imagine that it was the same way back then, where sort of like it's not straightforward reporting in like magazines like these, in media like these. It's sort of like they're trying to create a narrative and they're trying to create a story for you and sort of like jerk you along a little bit in the way that this film jerks you along, of sort of, you know, like, did he do it, like was the body her, all of this, all of that. And you know, like that sort of that back and forth is crucial, like in this sort of reporting, as much as it is in noir.
I also think it's interesting how the audience thought, like, we thought we were in the know the whole time of what's happening because we saw him like plan this whole thing, and then at the end we're like, wait, we knew nothing. Because I feel like, at least with most film noirs that we've seen, the audience has been in the know for at least a good majority of it. But at the end, the audience finds out they knew like a fourth of the actual story.
Yeah, like we thought we were in the know.
Yeah.
We weren't in the know.
And I don't know, I thought that was a cool twist. But we did get to that part of the movie, and I was like, why is the movie still going? And then the twist happened, and I was like, yes, that's what.
Yeah, because I thought like the main, you know, like the main sort of like snag in the plan was going to be the car accident that like kills, you know, like the main conspirator in the case, the father-in-law, and also burns up the evidence. I'm just sort of like, oh, okay, so like that's our main thing. That's our main issue. Then they like sideswipe us in the third act with, oh, he actually did kill her and she was his wife and all of this.
Yeah, the father also was like in kind of the same position as Susan, where like he really didn't know anything either. Like Garrett was really just like pulling the strings to this entire thing, like to every character in this film, and then also to like the audience. I think Anna said, like in film noir, we're usually like an inside man, like we know who did it and they're trying to hide it from us. But in this film, we were just really on the outside until like that last like 10 minutes where he was like, oh, Emma, and then we're like, excuse me. Yeah, so.
Well, if you guys are ready to go to the next
Yeah,
person,
I can go now.
I'll stop sharing.
Alrighty, give me 1 second. I'm not very good at screen sharing. I'm technologically inept.
Oh.
Ugh. Okay, there we go. Can we see this?
Yeah.
You might need to zoom in.
It is a little bit blurry.
Or you can just read it.
I don't know like how important the text is to you.
So the text that I really focused on was the one that you can read. Yeah, I got this off of eBay. Like the person selling it did not do a good job taking photos. But it says, only my killer knows my name, which I thought referenced, again, we were talking about previously, the whole Emma debacle. Because only her killer knew her name was Emma until like everyone figured out later, but like he would have known prior. And I also really liked how like there's the shadow on who I'm assuming is a detective because of the hat. And it's just like very like noir-esque, like how they would have lit it. And then you have this like really like ghostly pale figure of the girl who is supposed to be dead, but I don't think it looks like a dead body. And yeah, so I don't know, does anyone else have any thoughts?
I think that this cover like quote unquote like shines light on Patty in a way that like the film kind of didn't. Like I wrote down at one point that we never see a picture of Patty that I can recall. Like
we saw like a quick one in a newspaper of her dead in a ditch.
Yeah, she was
like we saw the crime scene photos.
Yeah, so like she was like, I don't know, I felt like she was very a big part of the film, but she was also like overlooked kind of as like a person. Like she was very much like just the burlesque dancer who like, you know, she was just like one of those. But I wrote that down that like there was like we didn't really see a lot of like her, even though we were like so in depth in her life kind of without knowing it, like watching her husband like hide her murder type thing. I don't know, that's just something.
Also, every time people talked about her, they talked so badly about her. They were like, Pat, no one likes her. She's mean.
Yeah.
Every time. I'm like, this poor girl's murdered.
Like, yeah, she was treated in kind of like a weird way for like being a victim. Like, people were like, kind of like, oh yeah, she was like so nasty and like no one liked her. And like, I'm like, she's literally the victim whose murder you're trying to solve. And like, okay, speak ill on the dead, I guess.
It does reflect a little bit how like certain types of true crime reporting works. Like, I know that today we have a little bit more, you know, like respect for the dead, and we kind of realize that maybe bad mouthing murder victims in reporting isn't good. But sort of like in this type of very, you know, like salacious, you know, like kind of to a degree exploitative and theatrical sort of reporting that we would get in these sorts of magazines, it's sort of like, it almost feels like it, like the reporters would almost feel like it would enhance the story of sort of, you know, like, oh, this like, you know, very, you know, like scandalous, you know, like criminal, you know, like on the edge person, you know, like was murdered and no one knows her. And sort of like that kind of, you know, like, you know, and to a degree sort of like, the murder is about the victim, but it's not about the victim. It's about, you know, like how they were killed, and it's about the murderer a lot more in these sorts of cases. Sort of like how, you know, like the entire movie is about Patty's murder, but we never see Patty.
Yeah. I don't know. I wish I could see the other text. That's what's bothering me. It's like, but I think it's telling like a case story. But I wish I'm very mad at the eBay seller. But there's this
yeah,
was
I was gonna
cover.
say I knew you had another cover.
This is just the cover of the same one, which again just has the same line to it. But I think on this one it's interesting to cut out the detective guy, and it's just the woman looking over her, very like suspicious.
Totally.
Like the woman to me looks like she's like sussing her out. She's like,
yeah,
I don't know, you're really dead.
Well, I was gonna say that could comment on like how they're talking so badly about her even after dying, you know, like she, at least on this cover, is so like exposed and like on a table dead, and like there's this lady just like looking down.
She's most likely naked under this blanket, which again is like physically exposed, and then being like dead, she has no say over what people think about her, say about her, look at her, like what they do. So it's like, and then if no one knows her name except for her killer, then it's like she has nothing about herself that she owns. It's just like a body, which is very sad.
Yeah.
R.I.P. But yes, does somebody want to go next? I'm not like, because I can't see you guys.
Oh yeah, I think I'm the only one left.
Okay.
Yeah, let me
Sorry, I'm so bad at screen sharing.
Okay. So this should be it. Can we see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I actually was able to get sort of like an inside, sort of like an internal page, like, you know, shot of this, which was actually really hard to find. Most listings only give you the cover and then like a screenshot of an ad. For some reason, there were a lot of like Camel cigarette ads in there, and I was like, I want to see the pages. Anyway, though, this is from 1945. And this sort of like the big circle with, you know, like, I'll tell you where her body is. That's actually the title of the because there was also a shot of the page of the page of contents of like what stories are included in this thing, and all of them had very, you know, like clickbaity, very sensationalist titles like this, you know, like I'll tell you where her body is, which is actually a quote from the murderer, which is actually this guy on the bottom right of that page, and the little caption says next to him, you know, a confessed slayer is seen in the photo at the lower right. His smile here is typical. He continued to smile as he described various murders which made hardened officers wince. And sort of like this, and apparently the little byline in the page in the table of contents said, you know, like, oh, apparently he was responsible for 17 murders, and, you know, like all of this. And this sort of like cross section almost of like the investigation is interesting, of, you know, like this shot of, you know, like all the people standing around this sort of like patch of grass, and sort of like the caption is like, oh, this stick that this one officer is holding is pointing to the place where apparently a piece of evidence was found. You've got literally the victim's skull in this other pic on the other side of the page. You've got like a shot of the gun that the killer supposedly used, all of this stuff. And just sort of like the way that sort of like this crime is, you know, like dissected on this spread was very interesting to me, because you've got this sort of like nice clean cut guy, you know, like on the bottom right, of sort of, you know, like, oh, do you ever think that like this guy could commit a murder? And sort of like the way that he was very, you know, like jovial, very cheerful while he was describing the murders, where you've got this guy being very casual and very cavalier in the interrogation room. Meanwhile, all the officers are sort of like brought to discomfort by, you know, like what he's saying, and this sort of thing of like, here's where the body was found. You can't see the body, but you know, here's where we found it. Here's a guy showing all the officers where it was found, and then this shot of, you know, like, here's the skull of the murder victim, of this sort of like weird contrast of like, they're showing you very explicit stuff, but at the same time they're not. It kind of, you know, like reminds me of the way that the murder scene was presented and described in Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, where we got that one very brief shot of like the actual body at the crime scene. But other than that, it was mainly people visiting it after the fact, like, you know, Garrett and his father-in-law to set up the false evidence, or when he took the other burlesque dancer there to sort of try and, you know, like plant more suspicion. So it's always people visiting it after the fact, and you never really see, you know, like the actual thing, because this is all third parties viewing the crime after. To our knowledge, we don't actually know that Garrett is the murderer until the third act. But
yeah. I will say, I forget that people actually dress like this, not just in the film noir movies, because I was like, oh, look at, they dressed up like film noir detectives. And I'm like, wait, they actually dress like that? It's just the hat. But
all the fedoras.
Oh,
yeah.
Those hats. But I do, like, as a true crime fan, there's a whole debate about, like, still now, about how you showcase, like, evidence, and like, especially if you find like someone's body, and like how you showcase that in crime scene photos, like if that can be released, all that. So I find it really interesting that, like, you know, when did you say this one came out?
This was 1945.
So 1945, which I think people were a lot more like conservative is the only word I can think of like how they like showcase stuff in the media. Like you had like what they were not allowed to show and say in films at the time. And I think it's interesting that they're just like, here's a skull, here's somebody's former head.
Yeah.
And so I find it really interesting that, like, then when you think they wouldn't show that whatsoever, it's like when you see like the most crime scene photos being released that have like actual like bodies in them. And then versus nowadays, like you can, because there's creeps, but like no like public media outlet would actually like release it and like show you.
Yeah, because like now they'd sort of like they get the backlash, and even then, you know, like these magazines are, you know, like pulp stuff, which is basically, you know, like the equivalent of tabloids from back then. But I think even now, if, you know, you get like, you know, tabloidy type publications that, you know, like whenever they, you know, like, you know, publish this very, you know, like intimate, very like graphic stuff, they do get online backlash and things like that. And I just feel like it wasn't that normal, you know, like if you saw a crime scene photo that showed like the full body in one of these, I feel like back then people would just be a lot more likely to move on. I think they'd still, like, some people would definitely still find it distasteful, but they'd be more likely to sort of just like ignore it because it was just something that kind of happened.
Yeah, and also like imagine if the Daily Mail just posted dead body.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah, I feel like the Daily Mail posts a lot of stuff.
Like the Daily Mail posts some stuff, but I don't know if they'd post that.
Yeah,
and,
no, that's true.
I don't know. Just thought I want to say the word juxtaposition. I don't think that fits here, but I want to say it. I think that is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, you know, because you've got one photo at the bottom of, you know, like where they're not showing anything. It's just a guy pointing where the body was. But then, you know, like right, you know, like next to it, you know, like blown up and like much bigger, you actually have a piece of the body there. So, you know, like it's not like they couldn't get images of the body or anything. Yeah. Like they got the skull right there, but they still have that other image of sort of, you know, like, and here's where it was found. Even though it's the exact same location, the exact same shot, it's just like, you know, the skull isn't there in that one.
I'm also
like
appalled.
The arrows.
Appalled, but that's a side story.
Yeah, that's all I like noted about this one. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say.
I think that the way that is that the killer in the bottom right hand.
Yeah, that's the guy.
So the way that he's like he looks very unfazed by like being caught, like in the way that like Garrett was like like in the way that he presented himself is like very, I think, reminiscent of the way that like this guy presents himself, because like they both kind of have like not like a nonchalant body language, but like Garrett was really believing that like nothing was gonna happen to him. And this guy like also looks very unbothered by the events taking place.
Yeah, like I don't know like what he thinks that he's got on his side, or like what sort of like story he's gonna give the police, or anything like that. But yeah, just sort of like the self-assurance and sort of be like, yeah, I'm gonna like admit to all of this stuff. Granted, this guy's actually admitting to murder while Garrett didn't, but just the idea of like boldface telling the police, like here's what happened, and doing it so casually, definitely like similarities there.
Yeah, it's kind of, I feel like we've been watching so many films where it's like, it's not normalized to kill someone, but it happens like very nonchalantly. Like people are just killing people left and right, and just like, oh yeah, I know what to do. I'll kill them.
Yeah, they come
like
murders the solution so easily.
Yeah.
They're like
0 to 100.
So reading
like,
a lot of like
100.
yeah, and I guess the whole thing about noir is like on suspicion, and we don't know that it's happening, but we're still watching a movie where it's like where these true like scrolling through these true crime magazines and like seeing, for example, like yours, where this is a true story or based on a true story, and there's like it's the same kind of energy. It's like, whoa, and kind of scary, like how he's smiling and it's so nonchalant, and it's like, oh, I'll tell you where her body is.
Yeah, just like the smugness that's radiating from that sentence of like, show us where the body is. Oh, I'll tell you, buddy.
Yeah.
I also think it's funny how like in the first part of the film, Garrett's father-in-law, like I forget his name, but he says to Garrett that, I think he says about Garrett that someone is an unwitting victim of circumstance. I forget who exactly he says that line about, but I remember writing that line down about like an unwitting victim of circumstance, and how like Garrett we all thought that of Garrett when the car exploded, and we're like, oh my god, this bad thing is happening to this guy. Or like Patty turns out to really be the unwitting victim of circumstance, where like how this guy is kind of like, he's like smiling, and how Garrett was like so suave. We like don't think that about them. We like put Garrett in kind of like the victim mentality when the photographs are like burnt up, and we're like, no, he's innocent. So, and then that's like totally like flipped on its head when it's revealed that like he actually killed Patty. So that's just like one thing about like this guy, and how like they were able to like deceive us into like believing that there's something they're not. I don't know about this guy particularly, but like just like this picture of him.
Yeah. Especially because like, you like compare how you're feeling in the moment of the car crash versus in the moment of, like he knows her name is Emma, of just, like that's sort of like when my whole perception of the film personally shifted, because I thought it was going to be a thing of almost like I don't know, like the not like exactly a morality tale type thing, but just sort of like this, I like almost like a warning of like, this guy basically destroying himself because he wants to prove a point, and sort of you thought you were going to get out, but you didn't, and and now like your whole life is gone because you decided to just like do this petty thing of like, oh, I'm going to prove that the death penalty is flawed to like fuck over this DA that I don't like. But then it turns out that he actually did do it, and he was like, it was much more nefarious and basically trying to get pardoned for a crime that he did commit under the guise of him not committing it and being falsely accused. And just sort of like the whole thing is turned on its head there. Yeah. Where like you get like that same moment of sort of like he's going to the chair and he's going to die, but now like you're like it's very certain that like, oh yeah, he did commit the crime, he did deserve it. It's not an innocent man getting punished because of like ego or something. It's a guilty man getting punished, again because of ego, but in a different way.
Yeah, like that perspective of the entire movie and like where each character sits in relation to the crime is like completely like it's like you said, they're like completely turned on their head. Like the father-in-law goes from being like an inside man to like the audience not knowing anything at all, and then Garrett goes from being like this pseudo innocent guy who fabricated this crime in order to like prove a point to being actually guilty. And then like So like everything does kind of do a complete and utter 180, and it's kind of like leaving the audience in like this state of like suspension where they're like, what happens next? And then as like when the movie ends, like we don't really get like an actual ending, like we just get him taken out of a room. So that kind of like eeriness and that kind of like being suspended and like not knowing what's going to happen next kind of thing, like that mood is like carried throughout, because we're constantly being catapulted back and forth between like perspectives and storylines, and like you don't really know what's gonna come next. Like Susan originally wasn't gonna turn him in. She like was so distraught she couldn't even pick up the phone, and then suddenly they get a call. You don't even hear what's going on the other side of the call, but you know what's happening. And then like again, the storyline is kind of flipped. So, sorry, there's loud trucks outside my window.
Yeah, I'll stop the share now because I think we've like exhausted this image. I was very glad that I could find though like in good quality and like an actual inside shot, but yeah, I don't know. I think I did a good job.
Yeah, I think everyone's was kind of like related to the ontology of the crime and beyond a reasonable doubt. I think that just like the crime itself in this film is just so unlike what we've seen in past film noir screenings in this class, how like it was like we were on the side of an innocent man trying to make himself guilty for 95% of the movie, and then turns out that this was actually like just textbook film noir where we were like watching a guilty man trying to cover his tracks the whole time. So unless anyone has any
I have
other
a fun
thoughts. Oh,
fun fact. Yes.
time for trivia with Anna. Guess how long it took to make this movie? If you could have a guess, well, what would you say?
Is it like another like wacky like 2-week shoot like Detour was, or
20 days. They did this in 20. I can't get myself to write a paper in 20 days. Like I literally have to sit in my friend's room and be like, you have to make me write this. They made a whole film in 20 days. Oh, I had that motivation.
maybe that's why the car crash scene was like that.
Oh my god, when it started to flip, I like had to physically restrain myself from laughing. It was the slowest. I don't even think it was supposed to be in slow motion. It was just slow the way that he was like flipping, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't. Like,
Yeah,
like that.
I've hit many a car. It doesn't go that slow.
No, it was like he was like screaming, and I'm like, you literally have time to like unbuckle yourself and like walk away in the time that's taking your car to flip over.
Yeah,
and
I
also,
just sort of
I don't think would have caught on fire that easily from how it was hit.
Mm.
Like he would have had time to at least try to crawl out of the car.
Very
it also was never told, you know, like the thing of like, you know, like you never like, you know, he has the photos with him in the car, so like, but it was never really explicitly said, you know, like where he was going. And so, you know, like I, you know, like when I saw that scene, I'm just sort of like, oh, of course he's gonna have the photos with him. Like, of course this is gonna be like what fucks the whole operation.
And then the perspective is flipped yet again when the letter is revealed. They just literally just keep like feeding us information. They're like psych, and then like take it back and like turn it around.
Oh, he just goes to the guy. He goes, "Are you sure this is his handwriting?" And the guy goes,
He's like, yeah.
"Yeah."
Yeah.
I can't do that. So that man is a genius.
It's like it's sort of like it's very like, I don't know, it felt very like campy in those in like those moments. I just like, I love, you know, like just like how ridiculous noir can get, and I feel like that's sort of like an example of it. Sort of just like, oh, the one co-conspirator is killed and he has the evidence with him, and the guy, and like our main character is on death row. Oh no.
You have to suspend reality for a little bit in a couple scenes to like follow the plot. To be like, yeah, cars catch on fire that fast.
Before we go, there was actually one quote that like I couldn't find a way to wrench it in, but that I wrote down that I think is like just very prominent to like what we did today in like the episode where we looked at media and how media was just like such a big part of this film, in the way that like the crime was like the photographs and the televised interrogation and the newspapers. And there was one line where a character said they're just using the paper to arouse everyone's emotions. And I think that just like the way that these were presented, like these are real crimes, these are real people that died. Like Daphne's was like obviously like a real crime scene, but like the way that they're being kind of manipulated for the sake of like showcasing what the creator wants to be showcased and the narrative that wants to be spun is just like very pinpoint to what Beyond a Reasonable Doubt was trying to do. So that's just a quote I want to throw in there at the end, and just a little thought that I couldn't shoehorn in anywhere else. So
Okay.
awesome. Unless anyone has some additional thoughts on the movie or just some fun facts, I'll see you guys next week.
Yep.
You guys next week.
All right. Bye.
Yeah.